The spacecraft's metallic hum reverberated through the cabin as Commander Julian Cross adjusted his diplomatic badge. Earth's coalition had fought tirelessly for this moment, a rare opportunity to establish peaceful relations with the enigmatic Zalara, an alien race known for their isolation and unmatched technology. Julian's mission was clear: foster mutual understanding. The stakes were high, humanity's survival could very well depend on it. As the shuttle approached the gleaming city of Lenius, Julian marveled at the alien architecture. Towering spires of crystalline material pierced the atmosphere, reflecting the light into cascading rainbows. Hovering platforms bustled with Zalara citizens, their smooth opalescent skin shimmering under the amber glow of their sun. Yet, despite the breathtaking beauty around him, there was tension in the air. This was it, Julian thought, steadying his breath. No mistakes. He descended the ramp, flanked by 2 human guards, as the platform below met his boots with a slight hum. Waiting for him was Minister Ackler, a tall Zalara official whose silver-toned eyes studied him with clinical detachment. "Commander Cross," Ackler said, his voice melodic but distant. "On behalf of Queen Aelin, welcome to Zalara." Julian bowed slightly, keeping his tone even. "Minister Ackler, the honor is mine. Earth seeks to bridge our worlds, fostering cooperation for the betterment of all." Ackler's expression betrayed no emotion. "We shall see if such bridges can withstand the weight of their creators. Come, the Queen awaits your presence." The halls of the Zalara Palace shimmered with surreal beauty, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. The atmosphere was heavy with a strange floral scent that made Julian feel lightheaded, the odd effect of which he brushed aside. The welcoming banquet that evening was both mesmerizing and overwhelming. Julian had been warned about Zalara wine, a potent concoction with unpredictable effects on human biology, but under the watchful eyes of the Queen's court, he dared not refuse. As the evening wore on, his thoughts grew hazy, the laughter around him fading in and out. At times he felt a soft touch against his arm, a voice whispering just out of reach. But the most vivid memory that lingered in the recesses of his mind was that of piercing amethyst eyes, eyes that seemed to pull him into another world entirely, a world where nothing else mattered. He tried to shake it off the next morning, focusing on the day's agenda. The diplomatic mission couldn't falter because of a little overindulgence. By the 5th day, the atmosphere in the palace had shifted. Whispers followed Julian through the halls. Officials who had been cordial and welcoming now avoided his gaze, their expressions wary, even fearful. Something was wrong. The unease gnawed at him, intensifying with each passing moment until a sudden summons to the Queen's private chamber confirmed his fears. The doors slid open, revealing Queen Aelin, her commanding presence filling the room. Her silver crown gleamed under the soft lighting, but her expression was anything but regal. Calm fury burned in her violet eyes as they locked onto Julian. "Commander Julian Cross," she began, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "You have violated the sanctity of our people." Julian frozen, his heart sinking. "Your Majesty, I assure you, I've conducted myself with the utmost respect for Zalara customs." Her laughter was bitter, a stark contrast to the melodic tones of her court. "Respect? Do not feign ignorance. You have planted your seed within me, a crime of unparalleled gravity among my people." His mind raced, the fragments of the previous night flashing before him. Could it be true? Had he? The implications were staggering. "Your Majesty, if what you say is true," Julian stammered, "I assure you it was unintentional. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "Enough!" Queen Aelin thundered, her voice echoing off the walls. "The laws of Zalara are clear. The hybrid child is an abomination. My people will demand my abdication and chaos will ensue. You have doomed us both." Julian barely had time to process her words before guards seized him, their grip unyielding. He was dragged through the palace, his mind in a daze, to a cell constructed of shimmering force fields, where the cold, sterile light made everything feel even more unreal. As he sat on the metallic bench in the cell, the weight of the Queen's accusations crushed him. If he didn't find a solution, his life and Earth's hopes for peace would be extinguished at dawn. Yet a spark of determination flared within him. Humanity had faced extinction before and survived. He would not let one mistake undo everything. Somewhere in this palace lay the answer, and he would find it. The silence of the cell was broken only by the faint hum of the force field. Julian sat, tapping his fingers anxiously on the bench. How had a mission of diplomacy spiraled into this nightmare? The Queen's fury was undeniable, but there was something deeper in her words, a fear that went beyond personal consequence. The child she spoke of wasn't just a scandal, it was a threat to their entire way of life. His mind raced through every possible solution, but nothing seemed to make sense. The Zalara were meticulous, their technology beyond human understanding. Even the most advanced systems had weaknesses, however, he was sure of that. His training had prepared him for high-stakes negotiations, but this was something else. Still, he couldn't let Earth's first diplomatic mission end with his execution, let alone the potential collapse of relations between the two species. He studied the shimmering force field, the energy within it shifting with a rhythmic pulse that was almost hypnotic. Beyond it, two guards stood vigil, their angular forms illuminated by the dim light of the corridor. They were stoic, unyielding, but their vigilance hinted at a pattern, something routine that could be exploited. A faint clicking noise caught his attention, growing louder. The guards straightened, exchanging weary glances, and then a figure emerged from the shadows. Cloaked in deep crimson, the figure's attire was adorned with intricate designs that seemed to shimmer as they moved. The figure paused before Julian's cell, lowering their hood to reveal a pair of piercing violet eyes that held a deep, knowing gaze. The spacecraft's metallic hum reverberated through the cabin, a familiar sound that seemed to resonate deep within Commander Julian Cross's bones as he adjusted the clasp of his diplomatic badge. It wasn't just any insignia, it symbolized the culmination of years of negotiation, the fruit of Earth's coalition's painstaking efforts to secure this rare opportunity to engage with the enigmatic Zalara. A species known for their isolation, their advanced technology, and their utter refusal to share it with any outsiders. Humanity had fought long and hard for this moment, and now, standing at the threshold of a new chapter in intergalactic relations, Julian knew that the stakes were higher than any mission he had undertaken before. Establishing peaceful relations with the Zalara wasn't just an act of diplomacy, it could very well be the key to humanity's survival. With the impending crises facing Earth, forging alliances with technologically superior species could be the difference between extinction and salvation. As the shuttle descended through the clouds of Zalara's homeworld, Julian couldn't help but marvel at the sight that awaited them. The gleaming city of Lenius rose from the surface like a vision from a dream. Towering crystalline spires pierced the atmosphere, refracting the light of the twin suns into a breathtaking cascade of colors, casting rainbow hues across the landscape. Hovering platforms, shaped like discs and woven from some unknown metal, zipped through the air, carrying Zarian citizens in a blur of motion. Their smooth, opalescent skin shimmered under the amber glow of their sun, their faces serene and inscrutable. There was something almost otherworldly about the city, the way the architecture seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if the very stones had been grown, not built. Julian swallowed hard, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. This was it, the moment he had prepared for, the culmination of years of planning, and he couldn't afford to make a single misstep. He muttered to himself, a quiet mantra of resolve. Steady, Julian. No mistakes. The shuttle touched down on a smooth, polished platform that seemed to hum in resonance with the ship's metallic body. Two human guards, assigned to accompany him, flanked his sides as he descended the ramp. They were veterans of many missions themselves, yet even they couldn't hide the sense of awe in their posture. At the far end of the platform stood a figure waiting for them, Minister Ackler, one of the highest-ranking Zalara officials. He was tall, his figure almost ethereal, bathed in the soft light of the surrounding architecture. His silver-toned eyes studied Julian with a detached, clinical gaze that was both unnerving and regal. His voice, when it came, was smooth, melodic, and distant, carrying an air of command that seemed to float through the air like the Zalara themselves. Commander Cross, on behalf of Queen Aelin, welcome to Zalara. His words were formal, the accent lilting in a way that made the human tongue seem clumsy in comparison. Julian bowed slightly, trying to conceal the unease that threatened to rise within him. Minister Ackler, the honor is mine. Earth seeks to bridge our worlds, fostering cooperation for the betterment of all. Ackler's expression remained stoic, unreadable. We shall see if such bridges can withstand the weight of their creators. His tone was measured, though the faintest trace of skepticism undercut his words. Come, the Queen awaits your presence. The walk through the Zarian palace was unlike anything Julian had ever experienced. The very walls seemed to shimmer and shift, patterns of intricate designs pulsing as though alive, responding to the rhythms of the air and light. It was both mesmerizing and overwhelming, like stepping into a living, breathing work of art. The atmosphere was thick with a strange floral scent, heady and intoxicating, which made Julian feel lightheaded, his senses tingling with the unfamiliarity of it all. Despite his training, despite his preparation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of his depth. The welcoming banquet that evening was a blur of exotic foods, delicate wines, and rituals he didn't fully understand. The Zalara's hospitality was gracious, though there was an undercurrent of tension that Julian couldn't quite place. He'd been warned about their wine, Zarian wine, a potent concoction known for its unpredictable effects on human biology, but in the presence of the Queen's court, refusing it would be a grave insult. So he drank, hoping his body would withstand the unfamiliar substance. As the evening wore on, the room seemed to tilt, the voices of the Zalara blending into a low hum, their laughter and conversation a distant echo. Julian found himself drawn to a pair of amethyst eyes that seemed to pierce through him, drawing him into a daze. A soft touch on his arm lingered longer than was customary, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to fade away, replaced by something else. The next morning he awoke in his quarters, the sunlight filtering through the strange crystalline walls, but his mind was a haze. He remembered flashes of the previous night, laughter, a delicate touch and those piercing eyes, but the rest was a blur. He shook his head, trying to focus, but the effects of the wine lingered. He had a mission to fulfill, and it couldn't be distracted by a little overindulgence. However, by the fifth day the atmosphere in the palace had changed. Whispers followed Julian wherever he went. Zarian officials who had once greeted him with warm smiles now avoided his gaze, their once cordial demeanor replaced by distant formality. Something was wrong and Julian could feel it. His fears were confirmed when he was summoned to the Queen's private chambers. The doors slid open to reveal Queen Arilyn, her commanding presence filling the room. She was tall, her posture regal, her silver crown gleaming under the soft lighting. But her expression, it was anything but regal. Calm, but cold fury burned in her violet eyes as she addressed him. "Commander Julian Cross," she began, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "You have violated the sanctity of our people." Julian froze, every muscle in his body locking in place. "Your Majesty, I assure you, I have conducted myself with the utmost respect for Zarian customs." Her laughter was bitter, devoid of the melodic warmth that usually accompanied her words. "Respect." She tilted her head, her gaze narrowing. "Do not feign ignorance. You have planted your seed within me. A crime of unparalleled gravity among my people." His mind raced, replaying the foggy events of the banquet. Had he? The implications were staggering. "Your Majesty," he stammered, "if what you say is true, I assure you, it was unintentional. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding." "Enough," she thundered, her voice echoing off the crystalline walls. "The laws of Zalara are clear. The hybrid child is an abomination. My people will demand my abdication and chaos will ensue. You have doomed us both." Julian barely had time to process her words before two guards seized him, their grip unyielding. They dragged him through the palace to a cell, its walls formed of shimmering force fields that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. In the cold, sterile light, Julian sat on the metallic bench, his thoughts racing. He replayed the Queen's accusations over and over again. If he didn't find a solution, Earth's first diplomatic mission would end in failure, and humanity's hopes for peace could be dashed in an instant. But in the depths of his despair, a spark of determination flared within him. Humanity had faced extinction before and had survived. He would not let a single mistake destroy everything. Somewhere in this alien palace lay the answer, and he would find it. The silence of the cell was broken only by the faint hum of the force field. Julian's fingers drummed anxiously on the bench as his mind worked furiously. The Zalara were meticulous, their technology unmatched, but even the most advanced systems had weaknesses. His training had prepared him for high-stakes negotiations, not desperate escapes. Still he could not give up. He had to find a way out. This expanded version delves deeper into Julian's thoughts and experiences, enhancing the complexity of the narrative. It explores his psychological state, introduces more detailed descriptions of the Zalara environment, and builds tension leading up to his confrontation with Queen Arilyn. Shimmered as though alive. The figure paused before Julian's cell, lowering their hood to reveal a face that was both familiar and foreign, a hidden ally in this dark time. The figure who emerged from the shadows was striking, their face framed by flowing silver hair that shimmered in the dim light. The way they moved was deliberate and graceful, as though they were part of the very fabric of the palace. For a moment, Julian was unsure whether they were real or a mirage conjured by the disorienting isolation of his cell. But as they stepped forward, their presence became undeniable. Their eyes, silver like the moon, met his with a gaze that was both piercing and knowing, and their voice, though softer than the Queen's, carried an unmistakable authority that caused a shiver to run down his spine. "You are Julian Cross," the figure stated, their words measured and clear, though there was a slight undertone of curiosity in their tone. Julian was taken aback by the recognition, but he nodded cautiously, rising to his feet in response. "And you are?" Julian asked, his voice wary but steady, trying to maintain composure. "Call me Lyra," the figure replied, their lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "I am a concerned party." Lyra glanced at the guards standing at attention near his cell, their eyes blank but alert, then turned back to Julian with a knowing look. "You've caused quite the disturbance," she added, her voice carrying a note of grim amusement. "So I've been told," Julian said, a flicker of irony in his voice. He couldn't help it. The situation was so absurd, so far from the diplomatic mission he'd signed up for. "If you're here to lecture me about my so-called crime, you're wasting your breath. I didn't come to Zalera to cause harm." Lyra's smile faded slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "Intent matters little when the consequences are so dire," she replied, her voice taking on a more somber tone. "The Queen's anger is justified, but her actions are not. She plans to use you as a scapegoat to quell the unrest among our people. It's a desperate move, one that will ultimately fail. That is why I'm here." Julian's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "You want to help me?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. It felt too much like a trap. But something in Lyra's presence, something in her confidence, told him she was not lying. "I want to prevent a war," Lyra said simply, her expression hardening. "Your execution will not bring peace. It will only deepen the divide between our worlds." She hesitated for a moment, her gaze softening slightly. "And the child?" she trailed off, her voice growing quieter. "The child could be the key to something greater. A bridge, not an abomination." Julian's pulse quickened, and he couldn't suppress the shock that surged through him. "The child?" he echoed, his mind struggling to catch up with the implications. "You mean, what the Queen accused me of? That hybrid child?" His stomach churned at the thought, the sheer weight of the accusation hanging over him. Lyra nodded. "Yes. That child could be the key to uniting our peoples and bridging the divide that has existed for centuries. But the Queen will never see it that way if we let her act on her anger." She took a step closer to him, her silver eyes locking onto his with a look of deep resolve. "I can help you, Julian. But you must help yourself first." Julian stared at her, his mind reeling. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do I get out of this?" Lyra's expression hardened, a flash of something dangerous crossing her face. "This is not a rescue mission, Commander. Not yet. You must earn your freedom by proving your worth, not just to the Queen but to the Council of Elders. If they see value in your survival, they may intervene. But you must show them what humanity is capable of." "How am I supposed to do that from inside a cell?" Julian asked, frustration creeping into his voice. He could feel the walls closing in, the sense of helplessness threatening to overwhelm him. Lyra's gaze softened slightly, as though understanding his frustration. "The Elders value ingenuity and courage," she said, her voice low but firm. "I will leave you the tools, but you must find your way out. Show them that you are not the helpless prisoner they believe you to be." Julian's mind raced. He had no idea what Lyra meant by tools, but if there was even a chance she could help him, he had to take it. He had no choice but to trust her, at least for now. Without another word, Lyra reached into her cloak and withdrew a small, spherical device. She placed it just outside the shimmering force field surrounding his cell, and with a soft click, it began to emit a low-frequency hum. The force field flickered, its pulse distorting in response. Lyra glanced back at Julian, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've bought you time," she said urgently. "But not much. The guards will recover soon. Use the device wisely." With that, she turned and disappeared down the corridor, her crimson cloak billowing behind her like a fading ember, vanishing into the shadows. Julian stared at the device, its hum growing louder. His mind raced, but he couldn't afford to waste any more time. He didn't fully trust Lyra, but she was his only ally in this alien world. His options were limited, and escaping wasn't just about survival. It was about proving humanity's resilience and their capacity for ingenuity, as Lyra had said. Taking a deep breath, Julian reached out and touched the device. As his hand passed through the flickering force field, he was surprised to find it give way easily, as though the barrier was momentarily weakened by the device's interference. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, just as the guards began to stir. Their vacant expressions sharpened, and one of them barked an order. "Prisoner, stop." The guard's voice was commanding, but Julian didn't hesitate. He grabbed the device and hurled it toward them. The sphere released a burst of blinding light, temporarily disorienting the guards and sending them stumbling back. The momentary distraction gave him the opening he needed. Julian darted past them, his heart racing, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The corridors of the palace were a labyrinth of crystalline walls and strange, alien architecture. Every turn seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the palace, and yet he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The Zalara had built something unlike anything he had ever seen. But there was no time to appreciate it now. He had to move quickly but carefully. His mind was working furiously, trying to decipher Lyra's cryptic words. She had said that escaping wasn't just about survival, it was about showing the Zalara what humanity was capable of. As alarms blared throughout the palace, Julian found himself in a vast chamber. Towering crystalline structures surrounded him, their jagged forms glowing with an eerie light. At the center of the room was a console, its surface alive with shifting patterns as though it were a living thing. Julian approached it cautiously, his instincts telling him that this was no ordinary control panel. The moment he touched it, the console pulsed and a voice echoed in his mind. "Identify yourself?" "Julian Cross," he said, unsure whether the system would even understand him. "I'm an unauthorized intruder." "Intruder detected," the voice replied, its tone devoid of emotion. "Please state your purpose." The chamber hummed ominously, the crystalline structures around him glowing brighter. Julian's mind raced as he frantically searched the console. His training in alien technology was limited, but one thing was clear: adaptability was humanity's greatest strength. He placed his hands on the console, and the patterns beneath his fingers shifted, flowing in response to his touch. It was a gamble, but he had no choice. The hum grew louder, the light intensifying until everything went silent. The room dimmed, and the console's patterns settled into a steady rhythm. A new voice, calmer but no less commanding, echoed through the room. "You have accessed the heart of Lenius. State your purpose?" Julian took a deep breath. "I seek an audience with the Council of Elders," he said firmly. "I wish to prevent a war and prove that humanity is not your enemy." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before the voice responded again, this time with a hint of curiosity. "Your request is unprecedented," it said. "The Council will decide your fate." With that, the crystalline structures began to shift, forming an archway that glowed with an ethereal light. Julian stepped forward, his resolve unshaken. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on. He crossed the threshold, and as he did, the air seemed to grow denser, charged with an almost palpable energy. The next challenge awaited. This expanded version adds greater depth to the tension and decision-making Julian faces, explores the complexities of the Zalara Palace, and reveals more about the mysterious Lyra and her motives. The scene builds anticipation for the encounter with the Council of Elders, which could determine the future of humanity's survival. The center of the room held 5 towering figures, each cloaked in shimmering light. Their forms were only partially visible, their translucent bodies seeming to meld with the surrounding energy. They radiated a presence that was as vast as it was unknowable, and Julian felt himself drawn to their collective gaze. The Elders' power pulsed in the air, a quiet but overwhelming hum, as though their very presence bent the fabric of the space around them. Each figure stood unmoving, but the energy of their being rippled through the chamber, like the deep vibrations of a tuning fork that would continue to resonate for an eternity. The moment Julian entered the space, it felt as though time itself slowed. "Commander Julian Cross," one of them intoned, the voice resonating directly in his mind, bypassing the need for sound. The tone was neither harsh nor welcoming, it was simply aware, an expression of inevitability. Julian straightened his posture, meeting their unblinking gazes. "You stand accused of crimes against the sanctity of our Queen and, by extension, our people," the first elder continued, its words flowing effortlessly, like the passage of some ancient ritual. Another elder spoke then, its voice heavy with a kind of detached authority. "Your actions threaten to disrupt the delicate balance of our society. What have you to say in your defense?" Julian remained still, forcing himself to maintain eye contact with the elusive figures. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him, but he held firm. It was as though they were not just observing his words but probing his very soul for truth. "Esteemed elders," Julian began, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. "I acknowledge the severity of the situation, but I assure you, I did not knowingly commit the act for which I am accused. What occurred was unintentional, a misunderstanding brought on by circumstances beyond my control." The chamber thrummed with an almost palpable energy, the elders' collective presence intensifying as they processed his words. Their forms flickered faintly, their light pulsing rhythmically, like a heartbeat syncing with the flow of time itself. One of them spoke again, its tone sharper now, the edges of its voice cutting through the air. "Ignorance does not absolve consequence," it said. The words were cold and final, but Julian refused to falter. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Perhaps not," Julian replied, his tone gaining a firmness that mirrored his resolve. "But intent does matter." Humanity came to Zalera with open hands, seeking cooperation and mutual growth. If we falter now, if we allow fear and misunderstanding to separate us, both our worlds stand to lose the opportunity to create something truly extraordinary. The silence that followed was thick with expectation, every elder seemingly weighing the gravity of his words. One of the figures shifted, its light dimming slightly as though in consideration. "And yet," it began, the voice carrying an unspoken burden of ancient history, "your presence has already sown discord. The Queen's authority is questioned, and the purity of our lineage is in jeopardy. Why should we risk further instability for the sake of your species?" Julian's heart pounded, but he pressed on, unwilling to yield. He stepped forward, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air between them. "Because," he said, his voice unwavering, "this child, if they truly exist, isn't just a symbol of conflict. They are a bridge between our worlds, a testament to what we can achieve together. Humanity has faced crises before, and each time, we've endured by embracing the unknown and finding strength in unity. This child could embody that strength for both our peoples." The chamber fell silent, the elders' forms flickering as they seemed to deliberate in unison. The atmosphere thickened with their deliberations, a feeling of tension building to a crescendo. Julian's heart raced as he stood motionless, his mind racing with the stakes of what he had just put forward. He had gambled everything on his appeal to their reason, and now all he could do was wait. His hands were clenched at his sides, the uncertainty clawing at him. Finally, the first elder spoke again. "Your argument is compelling," it said, its voice surprisingly calm in contrast to the growing storm in the room. "Yet words alone cannot restore balance. Action must be taken to ensure stability and understanding between our species." There was an ominous weight to these words, an expectation that Julian had anticipated but not fully understood until now. "What do you propose?" Julian asked cautiously, his voice steady despite the trepidation rising within him. The holographic projections around the room began to shift, converging into a single image of an ancient structure, massive and imposing. It resembled a temple of sorts, with towering spires that seemed to stretch toward the heavens. The intricate carvings on the surface pulsed with an ethereal light, their patterns shifting in rhythm with an unseen force. "This is the Hall of Origins," the elder explained. "It holds the Codex of Unity, an artifact created during the founding of Zalera. It is said to contain the wisdom needed to guide us through times of great upheaval. However, the hall has remained sealed for millennia, and only one deemed worthy may enter." Julian's brow furrowed as he took in the image of the hall, a place of mystery and power. "You want me to retrieve the Codex?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "If you can," another elder replied, its light dimming as it spoke. "It will demonstrate not only your determination but also your compatibility with our people. Fail, and you will prove yourself unworthy of the bridge you seek to create." Julian's jaw tightened. The weight of their words settled over him like a physical force. "And if I succeed?" he asked, his voice low but filled with a quiet determination. The elder's light grew brighter, its energy surging with newfound intensity. "Then you will have earned not only your freedom but the chance to reshape the future of both our species. Are you willing to take this challenge?" Julian hesitated for only a moment. His mind raced at the enormity of the task before him, pressing down with unbearable weight. But then he knew. This wasn't just about survival. It was about proving humanity's capacity to rise to the occasion, to meet the impossible with strength and courage. He met the elder's gaze unwaveringly. "I'll do it," Julian said firmly, the words coming with a certainty that surprised even him. The archway behind him shimmered, its energy rearranging itself into a swirling portal. The first elder's voice resonated once more, clear and commanding. "Then go, Commander. The Hall of Origins awaits." Without another word, Julian stepped forward into the swirling portal. The world around him dissolved into a cascade of light, the colors and shapes shifting with a dizzying speed that left him momentarily disoriented. His mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what trials awaited him, but the resolve in his chest burned brighter than ever. The fate of two worlds rested on his success. When Julian emerged from the portal, he found himself standing on a barren plateau, the wind biting at his face as it swept across the desolate landscape. Above him, the twin suns hung low in the alien sky, casting harsh shadows across the jagged terrain. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a faint metallic tang that only added to the alien nature of the place. Before him stood the Hall of Origins, a monolithic structure carved from dark, glimmering stone that seemed to absorb and refract the light in unnatural ways. Its towering spires spiraled upward, defying gravity, while intricate glyphs glowed faintly along its surface, pulsing in rhythm with some unseen force. As Julian approached, the ground beneath him trembled slightly, vibrations resonating up through his boots. It felt as though the very earth was alive, responding to his presence. Jagged outcroppings of crystalline rock flanked the path, humming softly like an ancient dormant choir awakening to his arrival. The entrance to the hall was sealed by a massive door, intricately carved with an impression in the center shaped like a hand. Surrounding it, shifting glyphs pulsed, the energy rippling in patterns that were as unreadable as the stars themselves. Julian hesitated, his breath hitching as he took in the enormity of the moment. He had no idea what lay beyond this door or what tests awaited him. But one thing was certain, turning back was not an option. He steeled himself, placing his palm into the impression. A searing flash of light erupted from the door, momentarily blinding him. The door shuddered and began to shift, the glyphs rearranging themselves into new patterns. The structure groaned, the ancient stone sliding apart with a resonant tone that shook the very air. Julian stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown. Inside, the hall was vast. The ceiling seemed to disappear into shadow, and the walls were covered with the same glowing glyphs. The patterns flowed like rivers of light, their movements synchronized with an ancient rhythm. The air was thick, heavy with power. There was something in the atmosphere, something older than time itself, that pulsed around him. He had entered the Hall of Origins. The trials that awaited him would decide not only his fate but the fate of two worlds. The chamber seemed to hum in Julian's bones, the energy in the air vibrating with an ancient intensity. At the center of the vast space stood a pedestal, and atop it rested the Codex of Unity. The Codex was not merely an object, it was a crystalline sphere, pulsating with an inner light that shifted through a spectrum of colors, each hue resonating with a sense of both mystery and power. As Julian moved toward it, drawn by its enigmatic allure, the air around him seemed to thicken, charged with a weight he could feel in every fiber of his being. The chamber, once silent, suddenly filled with a deep, reverberating voice, not from any visible source but from everywhere at once. Who dares to seek the wisdom of the Codex? The voice boomed, filling the room with a presence so overwhelming that it seemed to shake the very ground beneath Julian's feet. Julian froze, his heart racing, his mind scrambling for a response. It was a challenge he had anticipated but never truly understood until this moment. "I am Commander Julian Cross of Earth," he said, his voice steady despite the tension mounting inside him. "I seek the Codex to mend the divide between humanity and Zalera." The voice rumbled in response, deep and distant, like thunder rolling over a faraway mountain range. "The Codex does not yield its wisdom to the unworthy. To claim it, you must prove that your spirit is aligned with the unity it represents. Are you prepared to face the trials?" "I am," Julian said without hesitation, though his palms were slick with sweat. His breath came in short bursts, the weight of the moment settling over him like an oppressive storm. The air around him began to shift. The chamber dimmed, and the Codex flared to life, casting beams of brilliant light in all directions. The walls of the room dissolved, and the space itself seemed to tear open, the swirling void of stars filling the expanse. In the blink of an eye, Julian was no longer standing in the Hall of Origins but in the midst of a battlefield. The sounds of war immediately surrounded him, the deafening shouts, the sharp cracks of gunfire, and the explosions that shook the earth beneath him. The acrid smell of smoke filled his nostrils, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. Julian recognized the scene before him. It was a memory from Earth's darkest days during the Coalition Wars. He stood amidst the chaos, his younger self commanding a desperate mission to protect a civilian colony from an overwhelming enemy force. The urgency of the mission pulsed through his veins as if it were happening all over again. The voice returned, quieter now but more piercing than before, its tone like the whisper of a storm about to break. "Unity is not forged in strength alone. It is born in sacrifice and understanding. Will you save the many by sacrificing the few?" Julian's throat tightened as he recognized the question. He knew how this memory ended. The colony had been saved, but at the cost of his closest friend, who had volunteered for a suicide mission to disable the enemy's main artillery. The memory surged forward, vivid and raw, but Julian held his ground. "I made that choice once," Julian said, his voice steady despite the turmoil of the battlefield around him. "I won't make it again without regret, but unity requires hard choices, and I would make them again if it means saving lives." The battlefield around him began to fade, the sounds of war and the acrid smell of smoke dissipating like a dream. The vision melted away, leaving Julian standing in the center of a quiet meadow under a starlit sky. The contrast was jarring. The air was calm and the distant hum of insects filled the space, a serenity that felt almost too peaceful after the chaos he had just witnessed. A child's laughter rang out, and Julian turned to see a small glowing figure standing before him. The child was a hybrid, its features a perfect blend of human and Zalaran, with eyes that shone like the stars above. The voice spoke again, softer this time but no less commanding. "Unity is also the courage to embrace what is different. Do you accept this future even if it means facing the wrath of those who fear it?" Julian knelt down, looking into the child's bright, curious eyes. For a long moment he said nothing. He could feel the weight of the question, the gravity of what was being asked. But in the face of it, he knew the answer. He had lived through humanity's greatest trials, and he understood the cost of unity better than most. "Yes," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "Because this future is worth fighting for." The meadow around him dissolved, like mist fading under the heat of the morning sun, and Julian found himself back in the Hall of Origins, standing before the Codex. Its light was brighter now, pulsing in time with the rapid beat of his heart. The voice, no longer distant and thunderous but present and resonant, spoke again. "You have faced the trials and proven your spirit. The Codex is yours to bear." Julian reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the Codex. In that moment, energy surged through him. An overwhelming torrent of images and knowledge flooded his mind. He saw the history of the Zalaran people, their triumphs, their struggles, their dreams, and their fears. He experienced their pain and their joy as though it were his own. He saw their hopes for a future built on unity, a future where the divide between their people and humanity could be healed. Within it all, one truth stood clear. Unity was possible, but it required courage, understanding, and a willingness to confront the unknown. As the light began to fade, Julian stood, the Codex now cradled gently in his hands. The visions had ended, but the knowledge and the weight of what he had just learned remained. The path back to the portal glowed faintly, beckoning him to return. He had succeeded, but the hardest part still lay ahead, convincing Queen Arilyn and her people that their shared future was worth embracing, no matter how uncertain it might seem. Julian returned to the Zalaran palace through the shimmering portal, the Codex of Unity pulsing faintly in his hands. The transition was jarring, the cold, sterile architecture of the palace a stark contrast to the vibrant, otherworldly realm he had just left. He stepped into the chamber where Queen Arilyn and Minister Ackler waited. Their expressions were unreadable, but the tension in the air was palpable. The guards flanking them tightened their grips on their weapons as Julian approached. Queen Arilyn's violet eyes narrowed as she studied him. "You dared to return," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Do you think that artifact will absolve you of your actions?" Julian met her gaze unflinchingly. "This isn't about absolution, Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm. "This is about a chance for something greater for both our people." A flicker of something, perhaps doubt, crossed the Queen's face as she glanced at the Codex. "A relic of our ancestors untouched for millennia," she mused, her voice tinged with both reverence and suspicion. "What makes you think you are worthy to wield it, human?" Julian stepped forward, holding the Codex aloft. Its light grew brighter, casting intricate patterns of glyphs across the walls. "I've seen what unity can achieve," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "I've walked through the trials and I've felt the cost of division. This child you carry, our child, could be the bridge that unites humanity and Zalara. The Codex has shown me that unity isn't weakness. It's strength. It's survival." The Queen's composure faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. But before she could speak, Minister Ackler stepped forward, his voice laced with skepticism. "Your words are eloquent, Commander, but the laws of Zalora are clear. A hybrid child is a threat to our societal order. The Queen's abdication is inevitable, and your presence here endangers us all." Julian turned to Ackler, his voice firm but calm. "Your laws were written in fear of the unknown. But fear is not a foundation for progress. If we remain bound by it, both our species will stagnate, and we'll lose the chance to achieve something extraordinary. The room fell into tense silence as Queen Arilyn studied Julian. Her expression was unreadable, but the weight of her people's expectations hung heavily in the air. The future of both their worlds rested on the next few words, the next decision she would make. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Queen Arilyn's shoulders. The light of the codex danced across her face, illuminating the conflict within her, a silent struggle between tradition and the possibility of a new future. For a long moment she said nothing, her gaze fixed on the artifact behind Julian, as though it might somehow offer her the answers she needed. Finally she spoke, her voice softer now but no less commanding. "If what you say is true and the codex has deemed you worthy," she began, her words measured and deliberate, "then its wisdom must guide us. But my people will not accept this easily. Convince them, Julian Cross. Prove to them, and to me, that this unity you speak of is worth the cost." The challenge was clear. The Queen had given him an opening, but it was not a guarantee of success. A trial before the court, a test of both his words and his actions, would determine the fate of not only his people but the future of the alliance between Earth and Zalera. Word of the Codex's activation spread rapidly throughout the palace and the surrounding city. By the following day, the Grand Convocation Hall was filled to capacity with Zalaran officials, scholars and citizens, their iridescent forms shimmering under the chamber's golden light. The air was charged with anticipation, curiosity, and tension. Julian stood before the assembly, flanked by Queen Arilyn and Minister Ackler, the codex resting on a pedestal behind him, its glow a constant reminder of the stakes. "People of Zalera," Julian began, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "I stand before you not as a conqueror or a judge, but as a representative of Earth and as someone who shares a bond with your queen, a bond that many of you see as a threat." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mixture of disbelief and unease. Julian raised his hands for silence and continued, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. "This child that Queen Arilyn carries is not an abomination. It is a symbol, a living testament to what our two peoples can achieve together. I understand your fear of the unknown, but fear has never led to greatness. It is through courage, through understanding that we evolve." An elder rose from the audience, his voice trembling with emotion as he spoke. "Our ancestors warned us of this. Hybrids destabilize our purity. They lead to chaos, not progress." His words, heavy with years of tradition, hung in the air like a challenge to everything Julian had just said. Julian nodded, acknowledging the elder's concerns. Purity can be strength, but it can also be prison. The Codex itself, the wisdom of your ancestors, shows that progress comes from adaptation, not isolation. Your people were not always the Zalera you are today. You changed. You grew. And you thrived. This is your chance to do so again. As Julian spoke, the codex began to hum softly. Its light intensified, and the glyphs along its surface rearranged themselves, projecting holographic images into the air. The crowd gasped in awe as scenes of Zalaran history unfolded before them, moments of triumph and despair, unity and division. They watched as their ancestors had struggled to build the society they now lived in and saw glimpses of their greatest achievements, as well as their darkest hours. Queen Arilyn stepped forward, her voice carrying a newfound resolve, the weight of her people's history now weighing heavily on her shoulders. "Our ancestors entrusted us with the Codex, not to preserve the past but to guide us into the future. If this child is to be born, it will mark a new chapter for our people, a chance to lead not through fear but through understanding. A new dawn." The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative hope, the first stirrings of belief that unity might be possible. Julian felt the shift, a subtle but undeniable change. The possibility of progress, of change taking root, was no longer just a dream but a tangible reality. Over the next few weeks, debates raged across Zalera. There were factions that rejected the idea of a hybrid child, groups that believed the alliance with Earth was nothing more than a dangerous experiment. But despite the vocal opposition, the momentum for unity grew. The Codex's reactivation became a symbol of a brighter future, one where humanity and Zalera could coexist and thrive together. When the day came for the child's birth, both humans and Zalarans gathered to witness the event. It was a momentous occasion, a testament to what they had achieved together. As Queen Arilyn cradled the newborn in her arms, its unique features, a perfect blend of both species, marveled the crowd. There was a quiet awe that settled over them, a realization that they had done something extraordinary. Julian stood beside her, his heart swelling with pride and hope. They had defied centuries of fear and prejudice, and the child they had created together was proof that a new era was possible. As the child's first cries echoed through the chamber, it felt not like an end but a beginning. The beginning of a new dawn for two worlds bound by a shared destiny. In the months following the child's birth, the delicate alliance between Earth and Zalera began to take shape. Diplomatic missions flourished, and cultural exchanges became more frequent. There was a renewed sense of optimism in both societies, driven by the symbolic importance of the hybrid child, who had been named Ilara. The name was carefully chosen, combining meanings from both human and Zalaran languages. Bridge of Light. Ilara's existence was a living testament to what could be achieved when fear was replaced with understanding, when two civilizations reached across their differences to build something greater. However, not everyone welcomed the change. Factions on both Earth and Zalera resisted the alliance, viewing it as a betrayal of their respective values and traditions. Julian found himself at the heart of these tensions, navigating delicate negotiations while balancing his new role as a father. The pressures of diplomacy and parenthood weighed heavily on him, but Ilara's presence reminded him of the stakes. One evening, as Julian held Ilara in his arms, her small luminous eyes gazing up at him, Queen Arilyn joined him on the balcony of the palace. The city of Lenith sparkled below them, its crystalline spires reflecting the light of the twin moons. A gentle breeze carried the scent of the flowers that bloomed in the gardens below. "She has your determination," Arilyn said softly, her gaze fixed on their child. Julian smiled, brushing a hand over Ilara's delicate hair. "And your strength. She's the best of both of us." Arilyn turned to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "Julian, I feared you from the moment you stepped onto this world. I feared what you represented, change, uncertainty. But now I see that fear blinded me to what we could achieve together. You've given me hope for a future I never thought possible." Julian met her gaze, his voice steady as he replied, "We've both had to face our fears, Arilyn. And we'll face more. But together we can prove to both our peoples that unity is worth fighting for." As the months turned into years, Ilara grew into a symbol of hope and resilience. Her unique heritage brought challenges, but also opportunities to bridge the gap between Earth and Zalera. She became a beacon for a new era, one where the walls of fear and division began to crumble and where the potential for unity between their worlds seemed more attainable with each passing day. Where differences were celebrated rather than feared, Julian and Arilyn's bond deepened, not just as co-parents but as partners in shaping a shared future for their worlds. They had walked a long, difficult road together, and though they knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, they were no longer alone. In the quiet moments when they stood side by side, gazing out at the future they had begun to build, the weight of their shared vision was clear. The Zillian sun rose over the shimmering spires of Lenith, casting its warm golden light over the city. It illuminated not just a world but a legacy, a future born of courage, love, and the unyielding belief that even the deepest divides could be bridged. Years passed, and Ilara's presence transformed the narrative between Earth and Zalera. Her natural intelligence and boundless curiosity made her a prodigy in both human and Zalaran sciences. She excelled in diplomacy, often bridging misunderstandings between the two worlds in ways that even seasoned leaders struggled to achieve. Her ability to harmonize perspectives gave her a presence beyond her years, one that often left others in awe of her wisdom. But not everyone embraced this unity. Deep in the shadows of Zalera and Earth, factions on both sides conspired to sabotage the alliance. They saw Ilara as a symbol of compromise, one that threatened the purity of their respective traditions. Whispers of an assassination attempt began to surface, prompting increased security around Ilara and her parents. Julian and Arilyn knew the threat was inevitable. As they prepared for a historic summit, a meeting meant to formalize an intergalactic accord, they were acutely aware that not everyone wanted peace. The summit was set to take place in Lenith, beneath the Grand Crystal, a structure designed to reflect the harmony between Zalera's natural beauty and humanity's engineering prowess. Delegates from dozens of star systems attended, their eyes fixed on the signing ceremony that would unite Earth and Zalera. As the moment arrived, Ilara stood by her parents' side, dressed in ceremonial attire that blended human and Zalaran motifs. Her luminous presence captivated the crowd, but it was clear that not all of them shared in the hope of unity. Queen Arilyn addressed the assembly first, her voice strong and clear. "We stand here today not as separate worlds but as partners in a shared future. We have learned to see beyond fear, to embrace the strength of our differences, and to rise together as one." Julian spoke next, emphasizing Earth's resilience and their collective determination to find peace. His words were met with applause, but as he finished, a sudden commotion erupted near the back of the hall. A group of armed dissidents burst into the chamber, their weapons raised. Panic swept through the assembly as screams echoed through the vast hall. The guards reacted swiftly, forming a protective barrier around the delegates and the royal family, but Julian didn't hesitate. Instinct and years of military training kicked in. He pulled Arilyn and Alara behind a protective pillar and grabbed a fallen guard's energy baton. "Stay here," he ordered Arilyn, his voice calm but firm. Arilyn's gaze met his, a silent understanding passing between them. She nodded, holding Alara tightly. Julian advanced toward the attackers, weaving through the chaos with precision. His movements were calculated, his resolve unshakable. As he closed the distance, he noticed something alarming. Their weapons were aimed not at the crowd but at Alara. His heart surged with protective instinct. "Over my dead body," he muttered, charging forward. The first dissident barely saw him coming. Julian disarmed him with a swift blow, using the baton to disable his weapon. The second attacker fired, but Julian ducked, using his agility to close the gap and neutralize the threat. Meanwhile, Arilyn emerged from her hiding spot, her Zalaran energy staff glowing with lethal precision. She joined Julian in the fray, her movements a blend of grace and fury. Together they fought side by side, their bond evident in their seamless coordination. The attackers were subdued but not without cost. One had managed to fire a shot that grazed Julian's shoulder, and Arilyn's staff flickered, its power source depleted. Still they stood victorious, the dissidents disarmed and captured. The room fell into stunned silence. The air was thick with tension as the family stood amidst the chaos. Alara stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the hall. "Enough." Her words held a power that transcended language. The crowd stilled, their fear replaced by awe. Alara, though young, spoke with certainty that commanded respect. "We have the chance to build something extraordinary," she said, her voice steady. "But we cannot let fear dictate our future. We are stronger together, not despite our differences but because of them. Let this moment remind us of what we can achieve when we choose unity over division." The delegates erupted into applause, the tension dissolving as hope filled the room. The treaty was signed moments later, sealing the alliance between Earth and Zalara. In the days that followed, the dissidents were brought to justice, their actions serving as a sobering reminder of the work that lay ahead. But Julian, Arilyn, and Alara remained undeterred. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. As they stood together on the balcony of the palace overlooking the shimmering city of Lenneth, Julian wrapped his arm around Arilyn. Alara leaned against them, her luminous eyes reflecting the twin moons above. The city below twinkled like a living jewel, the promise of a new era gleaming in every direction. "We've come so far," Arilyn said softly, her voice filled with both awe and gratitude. "And we're just getting started," Julian replied, a smile tugging at his lips. Alara looked up at them, her voice filled with conviction. "Together we'll make the future brighter than any of us imagined." And as the stars above bore witness, the family stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their legacy of courage, hope, and unity would light the path for generations to come. The journey was far from over, but with each step, they moved closer to a world where division was a thing of the past and the potential for peace and progress seemed limitless.